My daughter called me an embarrassment at her own wedding, right in front of the rich man who replaced me. A glass chimed loudly in the silence she created. She didn't see the look on the groom's face, but I did. He knew a secret that was about to turn her perfect day into ashes. You know that feeling, when your own child's world becomes so foreign that you feel like an unwelcome guest in the story you helped write. Hello everyone, my name is Mattie. Thank you for being here. This isn't a story meant for pity, it's for sharing. Because I know there are other men out there carrying these same quiet weights, these same unspoken stories. If you're listening, I'd love to know where you're from. Maybe the snowy Midwest, or down on the warm beaches of Florida. It's good to know we're in this together. For me, it all really began on a June afternoon, on a day that was supposed to be a beautiful memory. The drive itself was 6 hours long, 6 hours with nothing but the hum of the tires on the asphalt and my own thoughts for company. I'd put an old photo of Grace, from when she was about 10, on the passenger seat. Her, with a gap-toothed smile, holding up a little trout we'd caught at Miller's Pond. I kept glancing over at it, remembering the girl who used to think I knew everything. I felt a knot of hope and nervousness tighten in my stomach with every mile that passed. You hope you've done enough. You hope they remember the good times. You hope you still fit somewhere in their new life. When I finally arrived, that hope began to feel a little thin. My old Ford F-150, which has never failed me in 20 years, looked like a plow horse in a field of thoroughbreds. It was lost in a forest of shiny black Mercedes and silver BMWs, cars that hummed with a quiet power mine could only dream of. The truck smelled faintly of sawdust and honest work. These cars smelled like money. I had to park way down the street, under the shade of an old oak tree, feeling out of place before I even got out. When I stepped into the garden, it was like walking onto a movie set. I've built houses from the ground up, but I'd never seen a backyard like this. Flowers were everywhere, spilling out of stone urns and climbing up trellises in colors I didn't have names for. I could hear the gentle soaring sound of a violin somewhere, playing a tune that felt both beautiful and sad. All around me were women in flowing silk dresses and men in sharp tailored suits who looked like they'd never lifted anything heavier than a briefcase. I was wearing a rented suit myself. The fabric felt starchy and unfamiliar against my skin, and the collar was already starting to itch in the humid air. It was a costume, and a poorly fitting one at that. It just wasn't me. The only things that felt like my own were my hands. They rested at my sides, calloused and mapped with the lines and scars of 40 years spent on construction sites, in the blistering sun and the freezing cold. I tried to keep them curled into loose fists, so the cracked knuckles and permanently grimed fingernails wouldn't stand out so much. I didn't want much from the day. I had one simple, quiet hope lodged deep in my chest: to see my daughter happy, and maybe, if I was lucky, to get a hug that felt like she meant it. And then I saw her, Grace. She was standing near a white archway of roses, and she looked like an angel. The afternoon sun caught in her hair, and her white wedding dress seemed to glow. For a second, my heart just about stopped with a surge of pride so fierce it almost buckled my knees. That's my girl. She turned, her eyes scanning the crowd, and for a fleeting moment our eyes met. I let a smile spread across my face, the kind of open, unguarded smile only a father has, but the face that looked back at me was a stranger's. The look she gave me was cold and utterly blank. It wasn't a flicker of recognition, not even a hint of annoyance. Nothing. Her eyes slid right past me, no different than if I were one of the gardeners trimming the hedges. Then, just as quickly, she turned away, linking her arm through Richard's, her rich stepfather, and gave him a brilliant, beaming smile that lit up her whole face. That empty look hurt more than a slap ever could. It wasn't anger or disappointment. It was pure, absolute indifference. It was a look that said, clear as day, "You don't exist here." A young woman with a clipboard and a headset found me a few minutes later, her finger tracing down the glossy list of guests. She stumbled over the name Mattie Wilkins, saying it like it was a foreign language. When she finally found it, she pointed me toward a tiny table, almost an afterthought, tucked away behind a bubbling stone fountain and right next to the path the catering staff was using. It felt deliberate, a placement designed for invisibility. I sat down, a solitary island in a sea of celebration. From my corner, I could hear the bright, easy laughter from the main table where Grace was sitting with Richard and her new husband, Theodore. They were the sun in this universe, and I was a distant, cold planet pushed to the very edge of the system. I didn't order a drink. I just sat there, my hands resting on my knees, trying to make myself as small as possible. My old Carhartt jacket was back in the truck, but I could still feel its familiar, comforting weight on my shoulders. I wished I was wearing it instead. Sitting there, surrounded by all that polished luxury, my mind drifted back to a completely different time. It was 2008, right when the Great Recession hit and the world fell apart. The construction industry just evaporated. I lost my job, and nearly all of my retirement savings vanished overnight. Grace was just about to start college, and I spent night after night wide awake, staring at the ceiling, the worry gnawing at me until I thought I'd go gray. In the end, I did the only thing I could think of. I sold my old Chevy pickup, the one that had belonged to my late wife, the one I'd sworn I'd keep forever, the one that held more memories than a photo album. I sold it to make sure Grace had enough for her first semester's tuition and her books. I never told her. To me, it wasn't a sacrifice. It was just a father's responsibility. But now, looking at all this glamour, all this effortless wealth, I had to wonder, did she have any idea what was traded for her to get her start? Or was that past, my past, just an embarrassing memory she needed to bury? Across the crowd, my eyes landed on the groom, Theodore. He seemed like a decent man, with a straightforward way about him and a firm handshake when I'd met him briefly once before. A couple of times, I saw his gaze drift over in my direction, a look of curiosity, maybe even confusion. I saw him lean over and whisper something to Grace. She just shook her head quickly and changed the subject, her smile never wavering, a perfect mask. I figured she must have told him some other story about me, an edited version that fit better with her new life. I couldn't blame the kid. He only knew what Grace wanted him to know. I just hoped, for her sake, that he was a good man who would take care of her. Then I saw David, my best friend, standing over by the bar. He was the only guest I'd invited. We'd worked construction together for over 30 years, through good times and bad. He knew about the Chevy. He knew about the sleepless nights. Our eyes met through the crowd of strangers. He didn't smile. He just gave me a short, simple nod. But that nod said everything. I see it. I get it. I'm here with you, Mattie. His presence was the only anchor I had in that place. If it weren't for David, I think I would have walked out right then. But because of him, I decided I could stick it out a little longer. Just a little longer. After dinner, the sharp, high-pitched squeal of a microphone pulled me from my thoughts. It made me jump, and a hush fell over the garden. Grace was standing on a small, elevated stage, hand in hand with Theodore, Richard at their side. She looked radiant under the soft lights. "Everyone," she began, her voice as clear and perfect as a bell. "Today is the happiest day of my life. It's a dream come true, and I wouldn't be standing here today if it weren't for one man, for a true father." My heart did a strange, painful lurch in my chest. A tiny, foolish spark of hope ignited inside me. "Don't do it, Mattie," I told myself, but it was too late. Could it be? Could she actually be about to acknowledge me? Maybe just a small thank you. That's all I wanted. I found myself sitting up straighter, my rough hands clenching together in my lap without me even realizing it. "That man," Grace continued, turning to look at Richard with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration, "is my father, Richard. He came into my life and showed me what the world could be. He taught me about art, about finance, about how to be a confident woman in a world that wasn't built for us. He is the man who shaped me into who I am today. A wave of polite, enthusiastic applause rippled through the garden. I felt the air leave my lungs in a silent rush, like I'd been punched in the gut. She had crafted a whole new history for herself, a revised edition where I was nothing but a torn-out chapter. Every sacrifice, every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, erased in a few polished sentences. As if that wasn't enough, her eyes flickered over to my corner. It was a quick, dismissive glance, but one that everyone at the party could follow. Her voice took on a tone of fake, condescending pity that was worse than any anger. Of course, I'm grateful for my biological father, in a way. A few people tittered uncomfortably. He showed me the value of, well, manual labor. The words hung in the air, an insult disguised as a compliment. But unfortunately, we come from two very different worlds. His vision was always so limited, and his negativity was, for a long time, my greatest burden. A burden. She had called my love a burden. She was turning me into the villain of her success story, twisting my sacrifice into a weakness, my protection into negativity. My hands, the ones that had built the foundation of her life, were now being framed as a symbol of limitation. It was the cruelest kind of betrayal, performed on a public stage for all to see. I glanced over at Theodore. The polite smile was gone from his face. He wasn't clapping. He looked at Grace, his expression unreadable, and then his eyes shot back to me. The confusion I'd seen earlier had hardened into something else, something cold and appraising. He gave his head a tiny, almost imperceptible shake. He didn't believe what he was hearing, or maybe he was finally putting the pieces together. The isolated father in the corner and the story of the negative burden. I didn't know what he was thinking, but in that moment, his silence was louder than all the applause. It was a small crack in her perfect story. I couldn't listen to another word. I had endured enough. I came to this wedding with nothing but a father's love, and all I had received in return was public humiliation. The pride of a man, the little I had left, wouldn't let me just sit there and be trampled on. The decision wasn't sudden. It was a slow, heavy settling in my soul. I could stay and absorb more poison, or I could leave and keep what was left of myself intact. I chose myself. I slowly, deliberately pushed my chair back. The sound of its legs scraping against the stone patio felt deafening in my silent world. I had to go. I would leave quietly with the last shred of my dignity. I wouldn't ruin her day, even though she had just shattered my heart. I stood up, turned my back on the stage and all the staring faces, and began to walk. I hadn't taken 3 steps before Grace's voice cut through the air, amplified by the microphone, sharp and commanding. "Dad, where do you think you're going?" Every head turned to stare at me. A murmur went through the crowd. My invisibility was gone, replaced by the hot glare of 100 pairs of eyes. She was deliberately making me the center of negative attention. "I'm not finished. Sit down." It wasn't a request. It was an order. One more public insult, a final assertion of her power over me. She wanted me to sit there and take it, to be a prop in the final act of her performance. I couldn't. I just kept walking toward the exit, my gaze fixed on the oak tree down the street, and that's when I heard her say to a nearby security guard, her voice dripping with manufactured distress, "Please escort him out. He's making a scene." Grace's request, no, her command, hung in the suddenly silent garden, sharp and ugly. The gentle music had stopped. The soft chatter had died. All that was left was the sound of the fountain bubbling nearby, now seeming unnaturally loud and mocking. A tall security guard in a black suit, who had been standing discreetly by the main house, detached himself from the wall and started moving toward me. He didn't look aggressive. If anything, the set of his young face was deeply uncomfortable, his eyes darting between me and the beautiful young woman on the stage who had just given him such an ugly order. He was just a kid doing a job, and I wasn't going to make it any harder for him. More than that, the pride of a man who has worked for himself every single day of his life, a man who has never been in trouble with the law or been a burden to anyone, simply would not allow me to be dragged out of anywhere like a common drunk. My body might have been tired and old, but that part of me was still strong. I knew I had to walk on my own 2 feet. I looked at Grace one last time, my heart foolishly searching for, I don't know what. A flicker of regret, a moment of doubt in her cold eyes. There was nothing. She wasn't even looking at me anymore. Her gaze was fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder, her face a cold, determined mask. She was erasing the smudge, removing the stain that was her father from her perfect picture. It was a business transaction. I was a problem to be removed. I turned, and I could feel the heat of 100 pairs of eyes on my back. It felt like a physical weight, pushing me down, pressing the air from my lungs. Every guest was now a witness to my shame. The distance from my table to the garden gate was maybe 50 steps. It felt like a mile. Every footfall was heavy, each step a final, crushing goodbye to the daughter I thought I knew. I could hear the whispers starting up behind me, a venomous wave of hushed, curious chatter that followed me like a cloud of insects. Who is that? What did he do? My God, so embarrassing. The words were indistinct, but their meaning was crystal clear. I walked past tables laden with fancy food I couldn't name, tiny, elaborate things on silver trays, and half-empty glasses of champagne that cost more than my weekly groceries. The smell of expensive perfume and rich food, which had seemed so luxurious an hour ago, now turned my stomach. I caught my reflection in the large glass panes of the French doors leading into the main house. An old man in a cheap rented suit that hung awkwardly on his frame, his shoulders slumped in defeat, performing a slow, silent retreat. This wasn't just leaving a wedding. This was a public eviction. I was being exiled from the life of the very person I'd spent my own life building. A hot, burning shame crept up the back of my neck, a feeling I hadn't known in all my 67 years. Shame had always been for men who didn't keep their word, for men who didn't provide for their family. I had done both, unfailingly. And yet, here it was, my unwelcome companion on this long, lonely walk. My hand was almost at the gate. I could see the ornate cold brass of the handle, gleaming under the party lights. It was the portal back to the real world, my world, where my old truck and my small, quiet house were waiting. For a moment, a vivid image of my wife, Sarah, flashed in my mind. Her laughing face. I could almost hear her voice. What would she think if she saw this? She'd have cried. I know she would have. She had the soft heart. She would have been heartbroken for Grace and for me. Me, I was taught that men don't cry. We endure. We just take the hits and keep standing. So I took a deep, ragged breath, preparing my body for the finality of it, getting ready to push the gate open and leave it all behind me. Leave the daughter who had chosen a life without me. Leave this humiliation and never, ever look back. In that single desolate moment, I accepted it. I had accepted my fate. I was the loser in this story. Just as my fingers brushed against the cold shock of the metal, a voice cut through the suffocating silence. It wasn't loud, but it was clear and firm, slicing through the whispers like a knife. "Wait, Mr. Wilkins." I knew that voice. It was Theodore. I froze, my hand hovering an inch from the handle, not daring to turn around, not daring to hope. The entire garden seemed to hold its breath with me. Even the fountain seemed to have gone quiet. "Please," the voice came again, closer this time, more insistent. "Don't go." There was something in his tone, a note of profound respect, of unshakable command, that made me slowly, hesitantly, turn. For the first time all evening, I felt like someone actually saw me. Not the gardener, not the embarrassing relative in the bad suit, but me, Mattie Wilkins, a man. Theodore was standing there, his face no longer confused, but set with a kind of controlled, quiet anger that was more intimidating than any shouting could be. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking straight at Grace, who stood frozen by the stage, her face pale with shock and disbelief under the soft glow of the lanterns. Her perfect composure had finally cracked. "What are you doing, Grace?" he asked, his voice low but carrying with an authority that silenced the entire party. Grace stammered, flustered for the first time all night. "Theodore, this is my family business. You don't understand." He was making a scene. He shook his head, a single sharp motion of negation. "No, the only scene I saw was the one you created. The moment I agreed to marry you, your family became my family. It became my business too, and I will not stand by and watch you treat your own father this way." He said the words "your own father" with a special emphasis, a quiet condemnation that landed like a physical blow. Theodore turned to the security guard, who had stopped a few feet away, looking utterly lost. "You can go. No one is being escorted out of here tonight." His tone left no room for argument. The guard glanced at Grace's furious face, then back at Theodore's resolute one, and with a slight nod of what looked like relief, he quietly melted back into the shadows. Then Theodore did something I never expected. He walked up to the small stage where the band had been playing, and he picked up the microphone. He looked out at the sea of silent, watching guests, and then his eyes found mine across the lawn. His gaze was steady, and it held an apology. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice ringing out across the garden, clear and strong, "I sincerely apologize for this interruption. It seems there are a few things about the bride's family that I think we all, especially me, need to understand." The air grew thick with a palpable tension. Grace's perfectly constructed world was about to be set on fire. "First, I want to confess," Theodore said, his voice steady as a rock. "Before today, I was told a story about Grace's biological father, a story about a bitter, negative man who was a burden on her success. But when I came here tonight, I didn't see that man. I saw a quiet father, sitting alone in a forgotten corner, being completely ignored by his own daughter. And that made me ask some questions." He paused, and his eyes briefly met David's, who was standing near the bar, watching with a fierce intensity. And thankfully, I had the chance to speak with Mr. David Harris, a longtime friend of this family, who told me a very, very different story. All eyes swiveled to David, who simply gave a slow, deliberate nod of confirmation, a silent witness to the truth. Theodore took a deep breath. Grace said that Richard shaped her, but the truth is, she was shaped by concrete and sweat. She was built by the hands of Mr. Mattie Wilkins. He raised his own hand and pointed it toward me, not with pity, but with reverence. The gesture made my heart ache. The hands that worked double shifts on freezing scaffolds to pay for her tutoring. The hands that sold his late wife's memorial truck, his most prized possession, so his daughter could afford to go to college. My breath caught in my throat at the mention of the Chevy. To hear that secret spoken aloud, to have that sacrifice seen and honored, it was like a dam breaking inside me. The hands that took any manual labor job they could find during the 2008 recession, just to make sure Grace never went without a single thing. That is the man who shaped Grace Wilkins. Each word was a stone being laid in a new foundation, a foundation of truth. I could feel the invisible weight on my shoulders, the one I had carried for years, the weight of being misunderstood and discarded, begin to lift, bit by bit. Grace called her father a burden, Theodore continued, his voice now thick with a powerful emotion that resonated in every chest. "Ladies and gentlemen, this man carried the world on his back so that his daughter could fly. He gave up his fishing trips, his time with friends. He risked his own health working jobs that broke his body, all to invest in a future he thought would be better for her." His voice rose with righteous passion. "A father like that does not deserve to be called a burden. He does not deserve to be hidden in a corner and he sure as hell does not deserve to be humiliated and thrown out of his own daughter's wedding. "Theodore, stop it!" Grace shrieked from below the stage, her voice cracking with desperation and rage. "You're ruining everything!" He looked down at her, and all the love I'd seen in his eyes before was gone, replaced by a profound and painful disappointment. "You're right, Grace. I'm ruining a lie. A marriage cannot be built on a foundation of cruelty and ingratitude. It simply cannot stand." He placed the microphone back in its stand with a soft, final click. "I cannot marry a woman who is willing to trample on the very person who gave her everything. I cannot build a future with someone who has no respect for her own past." He turned back to the stunned crowd. "I am so sorry, everyone, but this wedding is off." A dead absolute silence fell over the garden. It was broken a moment later by a single, shattering sound. Grace's raw, animalistic scream of fury and disbelief. She lunged for the stage, but Theodore was already stepping away. Richard shot to his feet, his face a mottled red and white. The guests erupted in a chorus of whispers and gasps. Some people started to stand up, fumbling for their coats, unsure if they should stay or leave. And I just stood there, at the gate, in the eye of the hurricane. The shame, the pain, the years of feeling invisible, it all just evaporated in the heat of Theodore's words. All that was left was a strange, unbelievable lightness in my chest. Justice, in a way I could never have imagined, had been served. In the middle of the chaos, Theodore walked down from the stage. He walked straight past Grace, ignoring her cries and her outstretched hand, and came directly to me. He put a hand on my shoulder, a firm, respectful grip that felt more real than anything else that had happened all day. "Let's go, Mr. Wilkins," he said, his voice calm amidst the storm. "There's nothing left for us here." I looked at this young man, a stranger who had stood up and given me back my dignity when my own flesh and blood had tried to steal it. I couldn't find any words. My throat was too tight. I just nodded. With Theodore on one side and David, who had made his way through the stunned crowd with a look of fierce pride on his face, on the other, I turned my back on the wreckage of my daughter's gilded dream. And together, the three of us walked out. We didn't say a word as we walked out of that manicured garden, leaving the chaos behind us. The three of us, me, David, and this young man Theo, just walked in silence down the long, tree-lined street back to where I'd parked. The evening air was starting to cool, and the sounds of the disastrous party faded behind us until all we could hear were our own footsteps on the pavement and the chirping of crickets. It was a relief. My old Ford F-150 was waiting right where I'd left it, sitting patiently under the oak tree. In the fading light, it looked honest and reliable, a solid piece of American steel. It was the complete opposite of the fragile, glittering world we had just escaped. Theo stopped for a moment and just looked at my truck. Then his eyes drifted down to my hands, which were hanging awkwardly at my sides. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. "My dad had a truck like this," he said, his voice quiet. "An old Ram. He was a high school history teacher, taught me that a man's worth isn't measured by his bank account, but by the promises he keeps." And just like that, I knew. He wasn't just being polite. He understood. He truly, deeply understood. David, ever the anchor, clapped me on the shoulder, a firm, reassuring gesture that said, "It's over now, Mattie." I turned to Theodore, my throat thick with a gratitude that words have never been good enough to express. Words were never my strong suit anyway, so I just did what felt natural. I stuck out my hand. My calloused, scarred palm met his, and I gave it a firm shake. "Thank you, Theo," I managed to say. He nodded, his grip firm and respectful. "Don't call me Theodore. It's just Theo." He let go of my hand but held my gaze. "Listen, would you two mind if we went somewhere for a cup of coffee? I really don't feel like going home right now." David and I looked at each other. There was no need to speak. We both knew the look of a man who had just had his world turned upside down and just needed a quiet place to sit for a while. "I know a place not far from here," I said. "They make a decent pot of coffee." The place was an old-fashioned diner called the Corner Booth. It had cracked red vinyl seats, a long stainless steel counter, and the air smelled of freshly brewed coffee and bacon. The honest smell of a place that serves real food to real people. It was a world away from the tiny, unidentifiable appetizers and fancy champagne of the wedding. We slid into a booth in the back, the worn vinyl sighing under our weight. The waitress, a woman named Marge with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, came over. She's known me for 20 years. She glanced at the rented suit I was still wearing and raised a curious eyebrow, but she was professional enough not to ask. She just pulled a pencil from behind her ear. "The usual, Mattie?" "3 of 'em, Marge. Black," I said. This was my world, a simple place built on quiet routines and unspoken respect. Here, I wasn't an embarrassment. I was just Mattie, a regular. And that felt better than any fancy title or expensive suit ever could. Marge brought over 3 thick, heavy ceramic mugs of steaming black coffee. We sat in silence for a long moment, just letting the warmth of the mugs seep into our hands. The clatter of plates from the kitchen and the low hum of conversation from the other booths was a comforting sound. It was the sound of normal life. Finally, Theo spoke, his voice low. "Mr. Harris, David, he told me everything on the way over. About you working 2 job sites at once when Grace was in high school. About you re-shingling her roof by yourself after that big storm." He looked at me, his eyes full of a question he seemed almost afraid to ask. "I just don't get it. Why? Why would she become like that?" I took a long sip of the hot, bitter coffee. The truth was, I'd been asking myself that same question for years. "I don't know, Theo," I said, my voice raspy. "I really don't. Maybe the world I gave her, it just wasn't ever enough. She always seemed to be reaching for something more, something shinier, something a builder like me could never give her." Theo shook his head firmly. "You gave her everything that mattered." He stared out of the big plate glass window at my truck parked under the streetlights. "When I was a kid, my dad used to take me to his wood shop in the garage. He wasn't a builder, not like you, but he loved making things. He taught me how to use a chisel, how to feel the grain of the wood. He used to say, 'Theo, money comes and goes, but what you build with your own 2 hands and your good name, that's what lasts forever.'" He looked back at me. "I think you and my dad would have gotten along real well." Hearing him say that, a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. For the first time in so long, I felt seen. I felt validated. Not for the money I'd spent or the things I'd provided, but for the man I was. I looked at these 2 men sitting across from me in that worn-out booth, one my oldest friend, the other a near stranger, and I realized something important. Sometimes, understanding comes from the places you least expect it. We men, we're taught to be strong, to handle our own problems, to carry our burdens in silence. But maybe real strength is knowing when you just need a friend to sit with you, to share a quiet cup of coffee. As you're listening to this, have you ever felt like you could share more with a good friend than with your own family? I'd be interested to hear your story in the comments. We sat there for a long time after that, talking about everything and nothing. We talked about the local football team, about the best brand of oil for a pickup truck, about the frustration of buying something new only to have it break in a week. No one mentioned Grace. No one mentioned the wedding again. It was as if we had all silently agreed to leave it back there in that garden. When we finally stood up to leave, the night had fully settled in. David and I shook Theo's hand at the door. "If you need anything," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being, and I mean anything at all. A fence that needs mending, or just someone to talk to, you call me. Theo smiled, a real smile this time. "I'll remember that, Mr. Wilkins." "It's Mattie," I said. That night, driving home alone in my truck, I didn't feel lonely. I felt lighter. It felt like a heavy, painful chapter of my life had finally, mercifully come to a close. And a new one, quieter and more peaceful, was just beginning. The next morning, I woke up in my own house. The quiet was the first thing I noticed. It was a different kind of quiet than I was used to. It wasn't the silence of loneliness, which had been my companion for too many years. This was the silence of peace. The silence after a long, violent storm has finally passed. I went through my usual routine. I made a pot of coffee, the strong black kind I like, and sat down in my old worn armchair in the kitchen, the one that's molded perfectly to my shape over the years. I just sat there, sipping my coffee, looking out the window at the small vegetable garden I kept in the back. The sun was just coming up, turning the sky a soft gray and orange. For the first time in I don't know how many years, I didn't wake up with that familiar, invisible weight on my chest. The weight of worrying if Grace was happy, of wondering if I was a good enough father, of feeling like I was always falling short of her expectations. That weight had been lifted off me in that fancy garden yesterday. This morning, I was just me, Mattie Wilkins, in his kitchen with a cup of coffee, that's all. And to my surprise, that was enough. And then the phone rang. The sharp, shrill sound tore through the peaceful silence like a blade. It made me jump, splashing a little coffee onto my hand. I didn't have to look at the screen to know who it was. There was only one person who would be calling me at this hour, on this day. A part of me, the old paternal instinct, the habit of a lifetime, wanted to pick it up immediately. The ingrained worry kicked in. Is she okay? But another part of me, the part that had been woken up yesterday, the part that had stood with two good men in a quiet diner, told me to just let it ring. I sat there and stared at the phone as it buzzed and vibrated on the kitchen table, like it was a live grenade. Finally, on the fourth ring, I picked it up. I pressed the button, but said nothing. I just held it to my ear and listened to the silence. Then, I heard a sound on the other end. A choked sob. But it wasn't the sound of remorse. I know what regret sounds like. This was the sound of anger, of self-pity. She wasn't calling to apologize. She was calling to attack. I listened as she told me how her wedding was ruined, how Theodore had packed a bag and left, how her stepfather Richard was humiliated, how all her high society friends were gossiping about her. It was a long, rambling story of her own victimhood. And then, as I knew it would, the spear was aimed at me. "It's all your fault," she said, her voice thick with accusation. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't come. If you had just stayed in your corner and kept quiet, everything would have been perfect." For my entire life as her father, I had been the designated shock absorber for her emotions. I was used to taking the blame, whether I deserved it or not. It was easier than arguing, but this time was different. This time, her words had no weight. They were hollow. All I could hear was the selfishness, the desperate attempt to manipulate me back into my old role. I took a slow, deep breath. "No, Grace," I said. My voice was calm and steady, a stranger even to my own ears. It wasn't my fault. It was a simple sentence, 6 small words, but for me, it was a revolution. It was the first time I had ever refused to carry the burden of her manufactured guilt. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. She was so used to me placating her, apologizing just to keep the peace. The silence only lasted a second before she started up again, her voice rising in pitch, a new tirade of blame and accusation. I didn't listen to the rest. I had heard enough. "I have to go, Grace," I said. And before she could respond, I hung up. My hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer, unadulterated power of that small action. For the first time in my daughter's adult life, I had chosen my own well-being over her emotional demands. I had chosen my peace over her anger. The feeling was both terrifying and incredibly, breathtakingly liberating. I stood up from the kitchen table, leaving my coffee unfinished, and walked straight out of the back door to the old shed at the edge of my property. It had been neglected for years, cluttered with old tools and forgotten projects, covered in a thick layer of dust, a perfect reflection of my own cluttered mind. I pulled on the heavy wooden door, and with a groan of old hinges, it swung open, flooding the dark space with the bright morning sun. I needed to do something with my hands. I needed to build, to fix, to clean. I needed to throw out the old junk that was no longer useful. It was more than just a chore. It was a symbol. I wasn't just cleaning out a shed. I was cleaning out my life. Starting today, starting right now. My workshop had once been my kingdom, a place where I was in complete control, where the scent of pine and cedar was the air I breathed. Now, looking at it in the bright morning light, it was just a mess. A thick blanket of dust, the kind that takes years to settle, covered everything. My old DeWalt table saw, my Craftsman wrenches hanging on the pegboard, my collection of clamps, they were all muted under a layer of gray grime. Spiders had been hard at work, stringing their webs between the tools that were once extensions of my own hands. The whole place felt like a graveyard for half-finished projects and passions I'd set aside for things that seemed more important at the time. Bills, tuition payments, the never-ending list of demands that make up a life. Stepping into that shed felt like stepping into my own forgotten history. Cleaning it out was going to be like excavating my own soul. I started with the simple, physical act of sweeping. I found an old corn broom in the corner, and the rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape of the bristles against the concrete floor was the only sound. It was a good sound, a sound of progress. Slowly, methodically, the floor began to reappear from under the years of neglect. I worked my way through the space, taking each tool down from the wall. I wiped them clean with an old rag, feeling the familiar heft of a hammer, the cold, precise steel of a combination square. These were objects I knew, objects that made sense. After an hour, I got to the table saw. I wiped the dust from its surface, ran my hand over the cast iron top, and plugged it in. For a moment, I just stood there. Then, I hit the power switch. The motor screamed to life with a deafening, wonderful roar. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated power, a sound of potential. It was so loud it vibrated through the soles of my boots and drowned out every other thought in my head. This was a language I understood better than any other, the language of machinery, of wood, of creating something solid and real out of nothing. It was more honest than any conversation I'd had in years. While I was sorting through a stack of old lumber, my fingers brushed against a thick, beautiful slab of walnut. I'd forgotten all about it. I'd bought it years ago for a special project. And then the memory came back, clear as day, a promise. Years and years ago, my wife, Martha, had asked me to build her a rocking chair for the front porch. "A real sturdy one, Mattie," she'd said, smiling. "One we can grow old in together, watching the sunsets." But life got in the way. There was always a job that ran late, a bill that was due, Grace needing something. And then Martha got sick, and I never got around to it. The wood had just sat there, waiting. Well, now I had the time. I was going to build that chair. Not for her to sit in anymore, but for her. For the promise we made. David showed up around noon, just as the sun was at its highest. He walked in holding 2 bottles of cold beer, beaded with condensation. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He just took in the scene, the half-clean shed, the slab of walnut resting on the sawhorses, the look on my face. "Need a hand?" was all he asked. We'd been friends since high school. He'd been over in Vietnam back in '71, seen things no man should ever have to see. David understood, maybe better than anyone, that sometimes the best way to heal a wound inside is to work it out with your hands. We didn't need empty platitudes or awkward words of comfort. We needed a project. We worked together for the rest of the afternoon, mostly in a comfortable silence. The only sounds were the whine of the saw, the sharp thwack of a chisel hitting wood, the whisper of sandpaper smoothing a rough edge. This was a good silence. Not the cold, punishing silence Grace used as a weapon, but the easy silence of shared understanding. We come from a generation of men who believe that what you do is more important than what you say. David standing there, passing me a tool, right when I needed it, that meant more to me than 1,000 words of sympathy ever could. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, the workshop was transformed. It was cleaner than it had been in a decade, and the beautiful slab of walnut was no longer just a piece of wood. It had been measured, cut, and laid out. The first rough pieces of the rocking chair. The air in the shed was thick with the rich, clean smell of freshly cut sawdust. It was the smell of creation, the smell of purpose. I hadn't felt this way in a very long time. I wasn't Grace's father, the man who failed to fit into his daughter's shiny world. That night, standing in my small, reclaimed kingdom, surrounded by my tools and the scent of hard work, I was just Mattie, a carpenter. And for the first time in forever, that felt like more than enough. A few weeks went by. My life fell into a new rhythm, one that I set for myself. I'd wake up early, drink my coffee while the sun came up, and then head out to the workshop. The rocking chair was slowly, beautifully taking shape. I worked patiently, meticulously. Each joint had to be perfect, each curve sanded until it was as smooth as a river stone. The work required a deep focus, a concentration that left no room for my mind to wander back to the past. I wasn't thinking about Grace or the wedding anymore. I was thinking about the grain of the wood, the angle of the next cut, how to make the chair strong enough to last 100 years. I was building something again, and the feeling was solid, real, and deeply satisfying. One afternoon, I was sanding one of the armrests, lost in the work, when I heard a car pull up. I glanced out the door and saw an unfamiliar car parked at the curb. It wasn't one of Richard's luxury sedans. It was a simple, practical Honda Accord. The driver's door opened, and Theo got out. He looked completely different. The expensive wedding suit was gone, replaced by a simple t-shirt and a pair of Levi's jeans. He looked younger, more relaxed. He walked toward the open door of the workshop with a slight hesitation in his step. "Hi, Mattie," he said, his voice a little uncertain. "I was just driving by. Hope I'm not interrupting." I switched off the sander, the sudden silence buzzing in my ears. "Not at all. Come on in, Theo." He stepped inside, his eyes taking in the newly organized space. He looked around at the clean tools, the neat stacks of lumber, and the half-finished chair. I just wanted to let you know it's officially over," he said, his voice even. "Between me and Grace." He didn't offer any details, and I didn't ask for any. It was his story, not mine. I just nodded. "I'm sorry for everything that happened," he added. I shook my head. "You have nothing to be sorry for, son. You did the right thing." His eyes fell on the rocking chair, and his expression softened. "That's beautiful. Who are you making it for?" I felt a familiar lump form in my throat. "For my wife," I said, my voice a little rough. "It's a promise I made a long time ago." Theo walked over to the chair. He didn't touch it, but he leaned in close, examining it with a genuine, deep appreciation. "This is walnut, isn't it? The joinery here, it's perfect." He wasn't just making polite conversation. He was actually seeing it. He saw the craftsmanship, the hours of labor, the care I had poured into every single piece. It was the kind of recognition, the kind of validation for my skills that I had quietly yearned for from my own daughter for years. And here it was, coming from a young man I barely knew. "My dad was a high school woodshop teacher," Theo said, a faint smile on his face. "He would have loved this." Theo's words made me think. His dad was a teacher, I was a builder. We were just ordinary men trying to pass on what we knew, the best way we knew how. Maybe the best legacies aren't stocks and bonds, but a skill, a lesson, a value passed down from one generation to the next. For those of you listening, did your father or grandfather ever teach you a skill? How to fix a car, how to fish, or even just how to hammer a nail straight? I'd love for you to share that memory in the comments. Actually, Theo said, shifting his weight a little nervously, that's kind of why I'm here. I'm moving into my own place, and I've always wanted to try and build a simple bookshelf, but I have no idea where to even start. He looked at me, a hopeful look in his eyes. I was wondering, would you mind if I came by sometime? Maybe I could learn a few things. I could help you out with whatever you need. I looked at this young man, a man who had lost a fiancée but found his integrity, a man who valued what could be built with your hands over what could be bought with a credit card. A real, genuine smile spread across my face. Don't call it learning, I said. Let's just call it two friends working on a project. How about this Saturday? Theo's face lit up. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Mattie. As he walked back to his car, I stood in the doorway of my workshop and watched him go. For the first time since I'd retired, I felt a new sense of purpose settle over me. I wasn't just finishing a promise to my wife anymore. I was about to pass on what I knew to someone who actually valued it. The feeling of being useless, of being an irrelevant old man, was completely gone. In its place was the warm, steady glow of hope. My workshop wasn't just my refuge from the world anymore. It was about to become a classroom, a place of connection, a new beginning. And just like that, a new routine was born, as steady and reliable as the sunrise. Every Saturday morning, like clockwork, Theo's Honda would pull up out front, and he had come into the workshop with 2 coffees from the diner. He was a quick study, that kid. He had good hands and a sharp mind that was used to solving problems, just with numbers instead of wood. He listened when I explained things, his brow furrowed in concentration. More importantly, he wasn't afraid to admit when he didn't know something, a quality I've always respected in a man. Our workdays in the shed became a comfortable blend of sound, the high-pitched whine of the router, the low growl of the sander, punctuated by easy conversation and, more often than not, laughter. We talked about everything under the sun. We'd argue about the Green Bay Packers' chances this season, debate the merits of oil-based versus water-based wood stains, and complain about the price of good plywood these days. He told me about his job in finance, a world of numbers and spreadsheets I couldn't begin to imagine. He talked about finding a new apartment, the quiet excitement of starting over from scratch. I told him about the big commercial jobs I'd worked on downtown, the ones where you could see the whole city spread out below you from the 30th floor like a map. And I told him stories about Martha, about the way she used to hum when she was gardening, about her terrible cooking and her incredible kindness. They were easy conversations, the kind you can only have between 2 men who respect each other, with no judgment and no pretense. I realized one afternoon, as we were measuring a cut twice to make sure it was perfect, that I hadn't had anyone to talk to like this in a very, very long time. Then, one sunny Saturday in late August, the day finally came. The rocking chair was finished. It stood in the center of the workshop, glowing. It was more beautiful than I had even imagined it could be. The deep, rich grain of the walnut seemed to move and shift in the light, alive under the final coat of hand-rubbed tongue oil. Every joint was tight as a drum, every edge sanded as smooth as glass. It was sturdy, graceful, and it felt like it was imbued with all the memory and affection I had poured into it. Theo and I carefully carried it out of the shed, across the lawn, me walking backwards, guiding him, and onto the front porch. We set it down in the exact spot Martha had pointed to all those years ago. It looked like it had always been there, like it had come home. This wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a promise, finally kept. It was the physical proof that I had weathered the storm and come out the other side. It was a symbol of a new beginning, built from the remnants of an old love. That evening, after Theo had gone home, I grabbed a cold bottle of beer from the fridge and went out to the porch. I sat down in the chair by myself. It rocked with a slow, gentle, perfect rhythm, a motion as comforting as a lullaby. The sun was setting, bleeding across the sky in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and deep purple. A cool breeze rustled the leaves of the big maple tree in the front yard. This was it. This was the exact moment Martha had dreamed of. I closed my eyes and could almost feel her sitting there with me, and I didn't feel the sharp sting of sadness I expected. Instead, a deep, profound sense of peace settled over me, a feeling of completeness that I hadn't felt in years. I had done it. I had kept my word to her. And more importantly, in the process of building her chair, I had rebuilt myself. As I was sitting there, lost in thought, I saw a familiar car drive slowly down my street. A late-model Lexus, gleaming even in the twilight. It was Grace. She didn't stop. She didn't even slow down much. I saw her head turn, her eyes glancing toward the house for just a second. I don't know if she saw me. I don't know if she saw the chair. Our eyes didn't meet. Then she faced forward again. The car accelerated smoothly, and it disappeared around the corner. A pang of sadness went through me, the old dull ache of a father's love. But it wasn't the crippling, soul-crushing pain it used to be. It was just a distant sorrow. She had her path, her world of shiny cars and brittle smiles. And now, finally, I had mine. A little while later, just as the last sliver of sun vanished and the streetlights flickered on, 2 sets of headlights turned onto my street. David's old pickup truck and Theo's Honda pulled up to the curb at almost the exact same time. They got out, carrying a couple of large pizza boxes and a case of beer. "Looked like you were having a party all by yourself," David boomed, his voice carrying in the quiet evening air. "Figured you could use some company to celebrate." We sat out on that porch for hours, the 3 of us. We ate pepperoni pizza straight from the box, drank cold beer, and talked. Theo told a terrible joke about a carpenter and a talking dog that made no sense at all, and we all laughed until our sides hurt. The new rocking chair was there, but it wasn't empty. It was the silent, sturdy center of a new circle of friendship. This was my family now, not a family bound by obligation or pretense, but one built on shared respect, easy laughter, and genuine affection. Looking at my 2 friends, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light, I realized something fundamental. A man's legacy isn't the money he leaves behind. It's not even the worldly success of his children. The real legacy is in the values he lives by every single day. It's in his craftsmanship, in the promises he keeps, in the integrity he refuses to compromise, and in the friendships he builds and nurtures. My legacy wasn't a successful daughter in a high society world. My legacy was this rocking chair, solid and true. It was my workshop, filled with tools and potential. And it was the good men sitting here with me, sharing a beer under the stars. I'm in my workshop. It's a place of life again. It's clean, organized, and filled with the rich scent of sawdust and possibility. On my workbench, laid out under the bright task light, are the plans for a small, simple bookshelf, Theo's first solo project, the next chapter in our story. I haven't written a letter to Grace. I don't think I ever will. Words on paper feel inadequate for what I've been through, but if I were to write one, I think I finally know what I would say. I wouldn't be angry. I wouldn't try to make her feel guilty. I would just tell her a story, the way a father should. I'd tell her that the shame she felt, the shame of me, of our simple past, was never mine to carry. It was always hers. She was ashamed because she was taught by her new, wealthy world to believe that what we had wasn't enough, that who we were wasn't enough. But she was wrong. We had everything that mattered. We had love, the real, unconditional kind. We had sacrifice, the quiet kind that doesn't ask for applause. And we had a home, built and paid for by these two hands. I'm not angry with her anymore. When I think of her now, which is less and less each day, I just feel a distant sorrow, a deep sadness for someone so lost in their own story that they can no longer tell what's real from what's fake. I spent my whole life working, providing. For decades, I thought that's what made a man a man. You get up, you go to work, you pay the bills, you put food on the table, but I was mistaken. The job, the paycheck, that's only part of it. What truly defines us is the foundation we build upon. And I'm not talking about the concrete foundations of the houses I built all over this city. I'm talking about the foundation of our character. It's about keeping your word, especially when no one is watching. It's about facing hardship without bowing your head in defeat. It's about knowing, deep in your bones, that your worth is not dependent on anyone else's approval or recognition. It has to come from the inside. I look at the tools on the wall, hanging neatly in their places. This hammer has driven thousands of nails, building walls that keep families warm and safe. This saw has cut miles of lumber, shaping raw material into something useful and beautiful. They aren't just inanimate objects, they are witnesses. They are the silent, steadfast proof of a life of honest labor. And now, they're not gathering dust. They're not relics of a life that's over. They're being used to create new things, to teach new skills to a young man who is eager to learn. I am no longer a retired builder, fading into obscurity. I am a teacher. I am a friend. I am a creator. I still have value. And that brings me to the last thing I want to say. Not to my daughter, but to you. To all of you who have been listening to my story. To the fathers, the grandfathers, the men who have spent your lives building. Maybe, sometimes you feel invisible. Maybe you feel like your sacrifices have gone unnoticed. Maybe you feel like the world has changed so fast that you've been left behind, and the things you know how to do, the things you value, don't matter anymore. But I want you to do something for me. I want you to look at your own two hands. Right now, wherever you are, look at them. In the calluses, in the scars, in the lines etched into your skin like a roadmap of your life. There is a story. It's a story of honor, of responsibility, of a quiet and powerful love that doesn't need fancy words to be real. It's the story of scraped knuckles from fixing a child's bicycle, of patience learned while teaching someone how to bait a hook, of strength used to provide and protect. Never let anyone, not your kids, not the world, not even the doubting voice inside your own head, tell you that what you have built with those hands is not enough. It is not just enough. It is everything.